Good day and welcome to the Tips for Practitioners, Talking with Fathers about Early Child Development and Parenting Skills webinar. As a reminder, today's conference is being recorded. At this time, I would like to turn the conference over to Nigel Vann. Please go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And again, welcome everybody. This is Nigel Vann with the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse. And as you see and know, obviously, we are going to be talking about early child development here today. Just a few notes. The webinar is being recorded, so in the next month or so, all the materials will be posted at our website, fatherhood.gov, and you'll be able to listen to this again if you want to, and you can download the slides and all the materials. Now, in terms of what you're seeing on your screen, you can download, right now, you can download the presenter bios. We have a list of helpful resources that I'll be talking about for a few minutes, and then we have handouts for each of the presenters. And beneath those handouts, if you scroll below them, you'll also see the slides, a PDF of today's slides if you want to download that. And as you have obviously seen, people are talking to each other in the chat box. In terms of questions for the presenters, we ask that you use the Ask a Question box, which is in the bottom right-hand corner. And then at the end of the webinar, we will have a Q&A with the presenters and get through as many of the questions as we can. If we don't get through all the questions, I'll see if the presenters can provide some written responses, which we will post after the webinar. And then we've also got various web links there, so you can see how you click on to various clearinghouse pages, and also the Fatherhood Project, which is John Bedelman's website. So with that, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the clearinghouse. For those of you who haven't joined us before, we are funded by Department of Health and Human Services, Administration for Children and Families, and their Office of Family Assistance. And the resources that are available on fatherhood.gov are primarily for fathers and practitioners, but there's also information for researchers and policymakers as well. Here again is our website. We always like to emphasize the toolkit, where you can actually download various resources that we're going to talk about today. And you can also find archives of all our webinars at fatherhood.gov/webinars. You can contact us with the help at fatherhoodgov.info email, and you can always call our national call center. It's staffed, it's not staffed 24/7, but it's staffed pretty extensively. We have trained counselors on the end of that line, and they can talk to fathers, they can talk to mothers, they can actually get fathers and mothers on separate lines together and do some mediation. They can also provide resources for practitioners. So it's a very useful number to have, 1-877-4DAD-411, and you can also connect with us via Facebook and Twitter. So in terms of today's webinar, as you see, we've got two very experienced practitioners here. You may well have heard of both of these gentlemen. I'll introduce them formally a little bit later, but they have an awful lot to share with you. We are going to be focusing on child development, from ages 0 to 8, and this is obviously one of the very best times to engage with dads, particularly if you can engage before they're born, in the first few months and years after the birth, because research is very clear, and you're going to hear a little bit about this from Gardner and John, but the research is very clear that early bonding with fathers and with mothers increases the chances of positive outcomes for not just the kids, but also the fathers and the mothers. And because men are often reluctant, I certainly know I was as I was grappling with some of the issues when I had a young child. A lot of guys are reluctant to ask for help, but so it's really good for practitioners who are working in responsible fatherhood programs, but also other family support and early childhood programs who are in touch with families to really have the skills to engaged dads, and that's a lot of what we're going to hear today from Gardner and John. And just want to emphasize again the helpful resources list and the fact that you can also download the handouts for Gardner and John in the downloadable resources section. I'm just going to quickly go over a few of the things that are on that helpful resources list. And these are resources from the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse. And the tip cards are designed actually for you to print if you want and share with dads. So they can be printed on paper, but they can also be printed on cardstock as a two-sided card. And this is just an example of some of the cards we've got. If you download the helpful resources list, you'll be able to click directly on the link to those resources. And then we have various resource briefs. We also have a series of safety tips for dads with tips on how to keep your children of various ages safe. And we've also got a link there at the bottom to a webinar we did back in 2013 that's also got a lot of useful information. So I'm just going to give you a quick glimpse of a couple of these tip cards. So this is the first tip card we did called Tip Card for Expectant Dads, and it gives you various information on that card. I know it's hard to read on the screen, but it's basically making the point that when dads are involved as supportive partners during pregnancy, it's good for their babies, it's good for the mother, and it's good for dads. And then on the flip side of that, there is some tips for dads. We haven't got that one up there, but this is the tip card for new dads. So this is for dads who just got that baby. And as it emphasizes at the top there, when dads are very involved from birth, their children do better, and dads do too. And then in the bullets below that, some of the things it's pointing out is that when dads are very involved from birth and their children form better friendships, do better at school, are less likely to get into trouble as teenagers, all the good research that I'm sure you're all well aware of now. But in terms of dads spending time, they do form a bond faster, and then they're likely to enjoy fatherhood more. And then the third column there is talking about a few things to be aware of as a new dad, because a lot of dads, particularly younger guys, may not be aware of some of these things. And so, it's pointing out that bright light can hurt your baby's eyes, loud sounds can be scary. So, and then on the flip side of that, here's a few things that as a dad you can do. So we're really encouraging dads to be involved, be caring, be there, hold your baby, cuddle them, talk to them. I certainly remember when my son was just born and I was talking to him in the crib, and I think probably a lot of us do that, but some guys may feel a bit awkward about doing that. So connect with them in whatever way you can, and these are some of the things that Gardner and John are going to be sharing here. This is a resource that was developed to provide tips for dads and for the practitioners that work with them, on ways to talk about healthy eating, good sleep habits, and ways to get good physical exercise for dads and kids. And some of the tips that it makes in terms of sleeping is, it talks about talking to your children about screen times and having some limits on what screens are going to be allowed in the bedroom, having a bedtime routine that you follow regularly, and making sure that you reduce the household noise at night. Again, things that a lot of new parents maybe don't necessarily focus on. And then finally, the resource I just want to quickly share is this one about the benefits of reading to your children. And it's just another way to talk with dads, and particularly dads who are maybe not that comfortable reading themselves or who didn't get read to themselves as children, just to emphasize how much fun it can be for their kid, for sure, but also for them. And so that's just a quick sample of some of the things we've got there. So before I introduce Gardner, we are going to pull a quick poll question. So if we can have the first poll question, Enzo. And so we're just wanting to get a sense of who's on the line so the presenters know who they're talking to. It is a little bit different than doing this in person. So just which of the following statements best describes the work you do? Looks like we got a fairly good spread across the board here. Looks like about 20% of you are working mainly with children, so that's great because you've really got the way in to reach some of these dads who fatherhood programs maybe aren't getting to, and then about the same percentage are working with mothers and children, and about the same who are working mainly with dads, so we really are across the board here. Okay, so let's close that one out, Enzo. I'd like to bring up our second poll question as well. I think we'll go ahead and do that. We usually save this for later, but I think it'll help the webinar flow a bit more. Now, I don't know if you've heard about the National Fatherhood Summit that OFA is organizing in conjunction with the Clearinghouse in Nashville. But if you have, if you could just let us know if you are going to be coming, and if not, you know, why not? So I know that the registration is now full, and so you may have tried to register and not being able to get in. And the main reason I'm asking this is because we will be having a workshop on this topic at the summit. So in a sense, this is sort of a sneak preview of that. There'll obviously be more time to go into depth in the workshop. And so it looks like we've got but 10% of you maybe are going to be there. So that's certainly good to know. And it looks like at least half of you are interested in attending future summits. So thank you very much for that. And with no further ado, then let me introduce my good friend Gardner Weishart, who I always say is perhaps the most aptly named person I know, because he is indeed a man with a wise heart. He has been working in this field for over 25 years, designing and implementing services, supervising staff, and providing direct service. He's provided training and technical assistance on father involvement, mainly with family support and early childhood programs, and he's done that across the United States and Canada. He is co-author of Maps for Dads, a father-child interaction curriculum that you're going to be hearing more about, and the handouts of his at the bottom there, they are from that curriculum. And he was founder and director of the program Dads Make a Difference, which was the fathering component of the Healthy Families San Angelo program. He has recently retired from that position, but he is still doing some consultant work under the umbrella of the Southwest Partnership for Fathers and Families. Back in the day, he was one of the original members of the board of directors for the now defunct National Practitioners Network for Fathers and Families, which I also was involved in, and that was a grand scheme at the time that hopefully will get reinvigorated. But we like to think that here at the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse, we are being able to sort of replicate some of the work that was going on there. And finally, I should point out that Gardner is married. He's got 2 daughters and a son, and his son actually runs a couple of restaurants. He's a chef in Austin, Texas, and I've had the pleasure of going to both of them, and they are extremely good. So with that, anyway, let me give the microphone to you, Gardner, and share a bit of that wisdom from your wise heart, please.
Well, thank you, Nigel, and I'm glad to be here today to visit with you all about involving dads in the lives of their children and supporting positive father-child interaction.
You are sounding a little bit faint, Gardner. If you could speak up just a little bit.
All right, thank you. The information that I'm going to present is based on research and experience and on strategies developed in the Dads Make a Difference project. In our program, we work with dads prenatally through the child's age 3. We met with them prenatally or at birth of the child and stay with them for 3 years. We work with them in home visits, dads groups, couples groups, and father-child play groups. Our focus is on what's in the best interest of the child. We partner with dad and advocate for the child. And to do this, we mobilize all the resources we can for all the people in the child's life. I'm having trouble moving that slide. There it is. Our focus today is on father-child interaction. What it is, why it's important, how to assess it, how to promote it, and help dads build on their strengths. But first, as Stephen Covey says, let's begin with the end in mind. What's the outcome we want? We want our children to have a set of emotional and intellectual skills that prepare them for successful lives. There are several things that are important for this to happen, and one of them is having an involved father. We know from research and our own experience that fathers play a unique and irreplaceable role in healthy child development. Of course, there are people who grow up without fathers and become successful adults. There are always people who beat the odds, but that's not what we're about. We're about changing the odds for our children. The first step in changing the odds is for us as practitioners to know about father-child interaction, what it is, why it's important, how to assess it, how to promote it. But let's start with a couple of definitions, just to be clear in our discussion. Father-child interaction is all the little exchanges that go on between father and child. The smiling, the cooing, the talking, the playing, picking up the baby when he cries, changing diapers, all of those things and more. The father-child relationship is the result of those interactions. It's the overall connections and feelings that dads and children have for each other. So those early relationships influence a child's ability to trust, his feelings of self, his perceptions of the world, their social relationships, and literally their brain development. So now we know what father-child interaction is and why it's important. Now, how do we assess it? When we first started out, our folks would report that there was good father-child interaction or bad father-child interaction, but this really wasn't very helpful. Luckily, our colleague Linda Elliott developed a systematic way to assess parent-child interaction that's clear, easy to use, and very helpful for those of us who are not child development specialists. The purpose of the assessment strategy is to structure your observations of the father-child interaction, and then you can use this tool for planning how to grow and promote the father-child interaction. It's called CHEERS with 3 E's. Now, as I go through these elements, keep in mind that they're based on what the research identifies as characteristics of an effective caregiver. How a significant caregiver responds is what leads towards effective attachment and bonding. These become the folks the child clings to when upset and relies on as a source of comfort and security as they explore their environment. So let's look at this tool and its individual components. Then I'll show you how we use it and use it to enhance positive father-child interaction. First is cues. Cues are the language of the child. What kind of cues does the child give? Does dad recognize and respond quickly and sensitively to them? Babies have ways of telling you what they think and feel and want. Crying is one way to say many things. Watching what he does helps you figure out what he wants. When he wants to say, let's party, he might smile at you, look in your eyes, widen his eyes, open his hands out and reach, babble and coo or laugh or get excited, or sometimes cry so you'll pick him up. When he wants to say, cool it, I need a break, he might turn his head away, look away, sneeze or cough, arch his back, kick his legs or wave his arms, or hiccup. When he wants to say, I don't know, but fix it, he might cry, kick his legs, wave his arms, turn his head away, search for something, or get excited. It's important that dads learn the cues of the baby, and then the toddler, and then the older child, so he can respond sensitively. Holding. What's the quality and frequency, including any touching? Expression. How much does dad talk to the baby or the child? Does he speak respectfully about the child, to the child? How frequently does Dad vocalize in ways that support the language development? And what's the frequency and quality of nonverbal expression by Dad between the father and the child? Especially eye contact, touch. These are so important. Empathy. Does Dad recognize the child's emotional states? Does Dad recognize the child's feelings and experiences? Does Dad respond sensitively to the child? How often? And it's important to keep in mind that empathy has two parts. The first is recognizing the states, and the second is responding to those states in a sensitive way. What are some examples of states? Infants are capable of expressing 7 states: sad, angry, interest, surprise, disgust, joy, and fear. And for toddlers, you can add frustration. Environment. And this is the environment as it relates to child development. Does the environment support growth and encourage child development? Is Dad interested in and supporting of his child's development? Does he speculate about upcoming development? Does he notice and attend to the child's development? Why is it important that dads understand normal child development? If they don't understand the child's development, there's a potential for dad to see the child as being hurtful or demanding or provocative. When they do understand, the child becomes cute and smart and fun. It's important for practitioners to have a good working knowledge of what to expect developmentally from kids to support positive father-child interaction. And there are many good resources like 0 to 3 with age-based charts that help dads learn about the skills and behaviors to expect from the child at each stage of development and how dad's interaction can promote positive father-child interaction. We don't have to be experts. Knowing about a child's development helps dads celebrate developmental milestones and anticipate what's to come. Now keep in mind that developmental milestones happen within a range of time, not on a certain date. Walking occurs around 12 months. It may happen somewhere between 11 months and 15 months. Kids have to master other activities before they can walk, like crawling, standing with support, standing on their own. There are also some differences between girls and boys. For example, girls tend to begin speaking earlier than boys. Helping dad support his child in his development will lead to positive, healthy outcomes for kids and a tighter bond between father and child. Knowing about child development will also help practitioners pick up on developmental delays. So many problems result from developmental delays. For example, kids entering school not ready to learn are mostly due to developmental delays, and when not picked up can lead to school failures. The earlier a delay is picked up, the more you can do to correct and bring the child up to level. And I think that programs and practitioners should consider using a developmental assessment. There are several out there. We use Ages and Stages. It's simple to use. And every 6 months or more often if needed, the practitioner, dad, and child go through a structured series of questions and activities about what the child is doing. We come out with information in a number of areas that indicate how the child is progressing developmentally. Ages and Stages is a great tool for teaching about this specific child's development, as well as how to prepare dad and child for the next developmental stage, as well as suggest potential activities for father and child to encourage appropriate development. If we pick up on a potential delay, we can refer to a medical home or another program for further evaluation and rehab. Rhythmicity and reciprocity. This is the give and take, the dance between father and child, with both contributing. Is there mutual initiation of interaction and activities? Is there a smooth back and forth, give and take quality in the interaction between dad and child? Smiles. Is there joy and love in the interactions in this relationship? Are there smiles? Your observation using cheers represents what happened during that time you were with dad and child and helps you to make plans for what to do next, strengthening areas and building on the strengths that you observed. In our program, after every contact with father and child, we complete a visit record, going through each area of cheers with a summary of interaction observed, strengths, areas for improvement, and a plan for the next home visit. So let's look at an actual home visit record using cheers. Cues. Dad was a little too much at times while playing with the baby. He didn't seem to recognize disengagement cues. Holding, touch. There was a lot of touching and patting, very nurturing. Expression. Dad talked a lot to baby and was positive and respectful. Eye contact between the two was good. Empathy. Baby started to get fussy, and Dad was slow to recognize he needed a diaper change. Environment. Dad was proud of his son's development, wanted me to see how he is pulling himself up, speculated that he would be walking soon. Said son was saying more words and wondered how he compared to other kids his age. Rhythmicity and reciprocity. There was a nice give and take between them. Dad would make a funny face and then wait for a response. Baby would giggle, then make a response. There was good dancing going on. Smiles. There's definitely joy in this relationship. Lots of playing and laughing. Strengths. One, there was nurturing touch. Two, there was frequent and respectful expression. Three, there was attention to and pride in the son's development. Expressed interest in future development, specifically verbal skills. Four, observed a joyful relationship between father and son. Areas for improvement. One, dad needs help recognizing cues, and two, recognizing emotional states. Plan for the next home visit. Take curriculum pages on recognizing and responding to cues. Emphasize why it's important. Take developmental information about language development and activities for dad to work with the child. You'll notice that the home visitor first reflected on the strengths he observed. You can use cheers not only as an observational tool, but also to organize your positive comments to reinforce behaviors while you're with dad and child. For example, to reinforce dad recognizing cues, you might say, "You really know what your baby needs." That will help him know he can trust you. Or for empathy, you could say, "He's so lucky to have a dad who can tell what his different cries mean." That helps him feel secure because you know what to do. Using cheers helps practitioners with teachable moments in an ongoing way. It promotes dad's learning in an experiential way, and it leads directly to activities that are tailored to this dad and this child. In this way, you're helping men become the dads they want to be. Thank you, and I hope this is useful to you in your work promoting positive father-child interaction. Nigel?
Thank you very much, Gardner. Yeah, and you do have this final slide as well. I did see there was one question about the ages and stages questionnaire that you mentioned.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll just pull that back up for one more minute.
Yeah.
So yes. So you know, if people want more information on that, they can go to agesandstages.com. But there are various other tools. There's all sorts of things out there, right?
There are a number of developmental assessments that are out there. This one we found to be the easiest to use, and it presented a lot of good information to the relationship, both the father and child, and as well as the mother and child.
Yeah, no, it is so important. Yeah, so we'll circle back on some of this in the Q&A. So any questions for Gardner, do go ahead and put those in the Ask a Question box now. We've got a couple of videos we're going to show. We're going to show one at the beginning of John's presentation, and then we've got another one that's particularly relevant for some of what Gardner was talking about on cheers. So, but both of those videos, if we don't have a chance to show the second one, they're on the helpful resources list. I'll just mention those real briefly now. The one that John is going to show, and he'll tell you more about that, is it's just called Antonio's Story. It's the story of a young man who was in one of the programs that John worked with. And then there's a, and you probably all know quite a bit about the serve and return approach, but it's, I was thinking about it as Gardner talked about how well you dance, but we've got a nice little video there. So if we don't have a chance to show it at the end of the webinar, I encourage you to check that out. That there's a link in the use. It's the very last item in the helpful resources list, and there's a YouTube link in there. So there's Gardner's contact info, and you'll have that again on the closing slide. So now let me introduce Mr. John Bedelman, who has done all sorts of things. He's not quite as old as Gardner and me, but he seems to have done all sorts of things in this fatherhood arena. He is the author of a very popular book called Modern Dad's Dilemma, How to Stay Connected with Your Kids in a Rapidly Changing World. And there is an activity from that available from the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse toolkit. In the activities section, you can download that. You can also download the activities that Gardner was just talking about directly from our toolkit. John is also the director of the PBS documentary, All Men Are Sons, Exploring the Legacy of Fatherhood. He's spoken internationally at convenings for schools, government agencies, and all sorts of organizations. He's been featured on ABC News, CBS Sunday Morning, NPR, in the Boston Globe and other media outlets. He is a regular contributing blogger for U.S. News and World Report. And just a brief word about his work at the Fatherhood Project with the Massachusetts General Hospital. He does two basic things there that he'll tell you a bit more about, but he's got a project working with expectant and brand new dads, and then he's got a project working with dads of slightly older kids, younger kids up to the age of 5 or so. So whereas Gardner has really been focusing in his remarks more on those very early stages, John's going to take us a slight step further down the line. And he also has a couple of kids, I believe, John. You've got a boy and a girl, right?
I do. 14-year-old.
Yeah, and his boy plays the real football, so that's always good for me. So you know, he plays the game where you kick the ball with your foot, the way I like to talk about it.
Except that he broke his hip doing it, but that's another story.
Yeah, no, definitely, yeah. No, there are problems out there, yeah. So so anyway, John, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Do you want to start with the video, or do you want to say a few remarks and then ask Enzo to pull it up?
Yeah, why don't I'll say a couple remarks, and then if we can put up the video pretty quickly, just because so much of what Gardner just presented, I think the video is it's a beautiful transition in that I think as you watch this video, you may even want to pull, well, I guess we don't, can you hear me okay?
Yep, you're good.
Sorry. Oh, okay. You'll want to certainly think about, or to the degree you have notes, or I don't know if you have the slide, but Gardner's cheers in terms of the interaction, because I think you'll notice pretty much every single one of them, and I'll remind you the cues: holding, expression, empathy, environment, reciprocity or dancing, rhythmicity. That's a good one, rhythmicity, and smiles. I would be hard pressed to say that you won't see all of those. So the video actually is a short clip from a larger piece that I believe is probably still available. I directed and produced it, or co-produced it for the what was called the Children's Trust Fund in Massachusetts. It is now called Children's Trust, and Children's Trust Massachusetts, I guess most states, if not every state, has a Children's Trust. You certainly can contact them, and it's or you can contact me and I can get you a link. The film has 4 stories in it. It's very short, each story about 2, 3, maybe 4 minutes, and this is one of those stories. So the film is called He Treasures Being a Dad, and they're portraits of fatherhood. So this is going to be Antonio's story. And I'll just say as a transition, so you'll see much of what Gardner, you can apply actually what Gardner was just talking about. But in terms of the way I think about this film, and then what I'm going to present to you is a little bit, as Nigel mentioned, age-wise, I will be looking a little bit forward from, as Nigel mentioned, we run a program at Fatherhood Project called the Dads and Kids Activity Group, and that's really for dads. And I, by the way, should note dad. I refer for dads to the word dad, father, as meaning biological and or whoever that primary male caretaker is, whether that's a grandfather or community father, etc. So I'm using that pretty broadly in most cases. The ones I'm not, I'll be specific about. But the program, the Dads and Kids Activity Group, is for dads with kids really from birth to 5. And we do have some dads that show up. It's on a Saturday morning in a community-based setting, a hospital, and it's through the pediatric department. So we also run obstetrics. We're doing research in obstetrics, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then I would say the bulk of my work now is around dads and education. So I'll touch upon this in terms of age-wise, what we think of as early childhood education into school-age children. And then we also, and you can see this at the website for the Fatherhood Project at MGH, which is there. The link will be there. We do a program for parents in recovery, as well as specifically gender-based moms in recovery, as well as dads in recovery from substance use disorder. So that's just a quick overview. We're gonna see the film, and the way I think of the interactions, I think of them as micro moments, and that's what I would ask you to look for in this film is these micro moments, these foundational moments of interaction between father and child that are so critical, as Gardner pointed out, and so often dads don't know that they're doing them, and I really want to highlight that. Antonio is a great example of a dad who, on so many levels, is doing so many great things with his child, and frankly, prior to at the time Children's Trust, and then I worked with him in both through the video, as well as I've included him he's in my book as well. He's just one of those guys that had learned and took a course actually through Boston Public Health Commission. But here's a dad who's doing a lot of really great things, but he didn't have the language for them, and didn't even know how good of a job he was doing. And I think that's what, if you take away anything from this, from what I'm going to say, it is that as practitioners, we need to help fathers develop a language and an understanding for their strengths, for what they're doing right, and help them understand that they should and they can do more of this. So I'll give you some examples afterwards, but that's what I think is critical, because if you don't know you're doing something right, you might not continue to do it. So With that said, let's see. I'm going to show you we're going to show you the video. I believe it's 4 minutes, and then we'll go from there. And I'm going to give you some practical practices and skills to take with you.
20 years from now,
so without further ado,
I would love for my daughter just to be like, Dad was there for me. When I first found out I was going to be a father, I was happy, scared, nervous, you know. My mom was wondering because it was like, I was only 19. It was like, you know, that's a lot to take, you know, a lot of responsibility you have to, you know, attend to. And I also thought it was a blessing, you know, and I knew it was going to help me because it was going to change me, because once she said she was pregnant, I stopped thinking about myself, because, you know, when you have somebody else to care for and attend to, you can't think about yourself. So, and I grew up without a father, so, you know, I knew no matter what, I was going to always be there for him. Seeing him smile is just, you know, it's worth everything. It could be a rainy, bad day, and he smiles, you'll just be like, you know what, today is a good day. Ready to go bye-bye? Bye-bye. Bye-bye. I really like just spending time with him. Like when we were together, I tried to go out to the stores as much, you know, just go shopping with him. He's an energetic kid, so it's like, you know, he loves to play, so, you know, he always keeps you on your toes, and, you know, it makes you not think about, you know, all the stuff that's going on. It just relaxes you and weighs you out at the same time, but it's fun. Is that all? Come on.
Uh-oh, that's super cool.
Take it easy. Go. You ready? You want red? Huh? Red? Red it is. Anybody can be a good parent. It just takes the time, and, you know, you got to be there to be a parent.
great. All right, so are we back here? All set, Nigel?
Yep, you're back. Yep. Just make
Okay,
sure
great.
that you've got your computer muted, John,
Yep,
if you had it
muted.
up to hear
Yep.
the video.
Excellent. Okay, so just a few, you know, obviously you see the many ways that Antonio was doing, you know, so much of the interaction. I just want to point out a couple of really important things in terms of what probably the most interesting to me that I didn't catch the first time I watched it, but when showing it to practitioners, people pointed out, and I would love to see if anyone can answer this. I'm looking at the questions. What did you notice about his trip to the supermarket? Is there anyone that sort of, and you can type it in there, what was the thing that stood out most about his trip to the supermarket? Let's see if anyone, I'll give 2 seconds here. Anyone gonna write in the answer? Well, I'm gonna give it to you. The buggy, he let him run around. That's it. Somebody answered it, and that is, yep, he did not have him. He did not have him in a cart, which, if he wasn't attentive and paying attention, that could be a risk factor. That could be a danger. But as you notice, he was very, very much in tune with his son, with Antonio Jr. And I think the benefit to me, as long as that child is safe, the benefit was tremendous. Now, he was just getting a few items, but the point is, what he gained from not being in the cart was he was able to really explore and take what if we think of attachment and a secure attachment, that is, there's what we refer to as the circle of security. So if you notice, when Antonio Jr. went up and the guy that worked there that said super cool, and he offered his hand to him, if you notice, Antonio Jr. went up to him and he responded, but he kept looking back to see if Dad was there. That was a great example of how a secure attachment is built. He went out of that circle of security, which was his father, and he moved away, and he sort of pushed it, and he kept looking back. He did the high five with the guy, the stranger in this case, and then he got excited, and he ran back to his father. And again, to his credit, his father was there for the entire interaction, and what that did was that's a great example of a micro interaction that builds connection between the father and child. That child knows he can take these risks, he can step out of that circle of security and return to it, and his father will be there. The father mimicked. He did what we refer to as serve and return. He even babbling, which I think a lot of dads don't understand the importance of language, and just even narrating their day or repeating whatever the child is saying. In this case, it was babbling. Antonio did that. That builds literacy skills as he gets older. And then the last thing is somebody mentioned too was he basically engaged that child in almost every aspect of what he was doing, including he handed him the bag at the very end, which was, I thought, really cute, because he handed it to him, and his son was interested for about a second or two, and then he let go of it, and his dad snickered. But the point is, he engaged him in all these little ways. So that, to me, is really, really critical in building the relationship and doing the work of interaction. So that's the micro moment. Moving kind of right along, I would like to just say, in terms of practitioners, it's really important, and Antonio is another good case for this, which is it's important that we think about what it is that we bring our own relationship or lack of relationship with our father in our life, or in cases where the mother was a significant figure. But I find for men, it's really important for them to look at what they got from their father, what they didn't get from their father as practitioners, because I think that has a huge impact on the ways that we see fathers, the belief systems that we have, the expectations that we have for the fathers that we work with. And I bring this up because Antonio, as a good example, talked about, and this is in my book, The Modern Dad's Dilemma, he talked about his experience of going into a healthcare setting, into the hospital, and going to a visit with his son, And he talked about this feeling of not being welcome, this feeling that he was being judged, that he didn't belong there. And I think it's really, really important as practitioners that we check ourselves and that we look at and reflect upon what are our own beliefs and attitudes towards the fathers we work with. You know, when Antonio talked specifically about, you know, he thought, gee, I wonder if it's the way that I'm dressed. I wonder if it's my afro, my hair being the way it is, because he, you know, very clearly articulated that he felt like he was being judged and being treated very differently than perhaps if he had come looking differently and he went on from there. So I just want to say that's important that we begin this by looking at what we bring to this work. And then I'm going to zip through a little bit of the research, but long and the short of it, we've done a study, I should say we're doing a study, it's ongoing, in obstetrics for this very reason, to look at what are men's experiences in early childhood and prenatally in this case. And what we found, I think, is very interesting, but I would say probably the most significant thing to me were these two statistics. Over a period, we did two-week periods where we sat in the waiting room at Mass General Hospital, which is a massive hospital in Boston, and we sat in the obstetrics room and waiting room, and we asked fathers to fill out or to do a survey on iPads. It was two parts. So the point of that is they had to fill it out before they went in for the visit, and most of them were there for prenatal visits, a lot for ultrasound, but for various reasons. And then they had to come, when they came out of the visit, they had to finish the survey. So point being, it was not a small, quick, you know, tick off 10 questions. It was a significant thing we asked them to do. We had 900 men fill out this survey over the period of basically 4 weeks. 900, which is, for any study, that's an incredible number, but specifically for fathers, it's unprecedented. And then also important to note, and I think is telling, is that 85% of the men that we approached, and we walked up to them and just, you know, cold and said, would you be willing to fill this out? We had an 85% response rate. Again, what does this say to me? What it says is men are hungry to be engaged, and they are hungry for information. And just going on, I'm not going to get into the details of what we found. You can look at this, but there were also very significant findings. One of them being that in general, there was a pretty significant portion of men across all socioeconomic status that felt as though they weren't necessarily being engaged or they weren't being informed as much as they could be. And they really wanted information. Specifically, a lot of men wanted information about how they could be useful, how they could help mom. So I think that's very, very important. We went over the research, as was mentioned numerous times, that we know dads matter. And the way I like to think of it is this. Having done this work for about 20 years now, it is no longer a question of whether or not to engage fathers. The question is, how are we going to engage fathers? We're done with asking the question, should we not? And I mean this across institutions, healthcare, education, social services, government, all of these institutions. We need to move beyond it because there is now a very, very robust, and it's growing every day, body of research that shows we know men matter. We know that dads have an impact whether they're there or not. In the past, it used to be the focus, 20, 30 years ago was almost exclusively on father's absence and what that impact is. We now know very much that father's presence makes a positive difference. How they're present, it matters. and the quality of that relationship matters. So I think it's critical that we have that attitude that it is no longer optional. No, I don't think it ever should have been, but the reality is it is not optional as to whether or not we engage dads. It's how we do it. And that being said, I want to give you 3 or 4 very concrete, I like to think of them as practices. They're skills as well, but really almost that word practice is important because these are activities that I encourage dads to do on a regular basis so that they can get in the habit of doing them. And the first one is this idea of being intentional as a parent. I think for fathers, this is a very simple idea, but somewhat radical and definitely different in terms of generationally. I don't think, I'm 50 years old. I'm pretty sure that my father did not do a dad's vision statement as you have up here on the screen. And frankly, I think having seen fathers do this and done these practices with fathers and sons and daughters for like I said, 20 years now, having dads do this and then share their vision for the relationship with their child when the children are old enough, 5, 6, 7 years old is I would deem old enough. Having a father do that has such a powerful effect on that child and on that relationship, because it's really to say with this question that I asked is, imagine 20 years from now, and this is what I did in the film that I made. Imagine 20 years from now, your child, and those of you that are parents can think of this, is interviewed about their relationship with you, their father, their mother. What do you hope that your child or your children say about you, about your relationship? What do you hope they don't say? And then what we do, and this is, again, in the full exercise that you can download, is ask dads to really then drill down on a specific parenting goal that can guide them or lead them towards this vision. So very, very concretely, a lot of dads will say, I hope my children say that I was there for them, that I was around. And usually in our programs, and we have a 10-session curriculum, we will kind of ask them to get specific about that. What do you mean to be around? What does that mean? Having meals together? Does that mean showing up for activities or events? And often they will say, what I hope my kids don't say in 20 years is, who's dad? Or, he wasn't there for me. Or a lot of guys will say, I hope I'm still around. I hope they don't say, talk about me in the past tense, which leads to them setting goals for being healthy and, staying healthy so they can be around. And then we have them take, specific action steps and think about, breaking down their goals. So this is a really important starting point, I think, for working with dads and the short version is, what are you doing? What are you trying to do with your children? What kind of relationship are you trying to build? And though it may not sound very radical or even significant, it is, because, again, I think historically fathers have been less proactive and more reactive in terms of their parenting. So this is a great way out of the gates with young kids to say, or even prenatally to say, hey, what are you up to? What kind of relationship do you want to build? And what can you do today to start moving towards that? So that's the vision. In terms of developing emotionally connected relationships, I think of this in terms of very simple, almost like a mantra or a saying that I like to teach dads is, for any relationship, really, you have to know and be known. You've got to know who you're dealing with, who that other person is. That means you have to listen to them. It means you have to pay attention to the details. You have to be present. So that's knowing. And then being known, which can be challenging for a lot of men in particular, for fathers, that is gradually and over time letting the other person know who you are. And the way I encourage that is through storytelling. Is really children, I think, want to know the stories of their father's lives, their parents' lives, that what dad was like at my age is sort of a guiding way to think of storytelling. So a couple of research points I think that are important. This idea of parental knowledge is a good one, and that is just really, and they found this to be true, that it's protective against many of the risk factors that pretty much all parents worry about. And parental knowledge is simply knowing what are your kids up to, where are they, who are they with, what are their daily experiences. And I think what's really important is that early on when kids are young, this is, frankly, it's easier. Now, of course, we've got all different contexts in terms of fathers who see their kids more or less often, and that can be very difficult depending on the family structure. But the idea is that with the intention of knowing and learning what the child is doing on a day-to-day basis, that can be done. That can be making sure you're in contact with the school or with the child care providers. It can be done with mom. It can be done with friends. In other words, the point is, it's easier when they're younger. As they get older, then that communication, that parental knowledge becomes more difficult, and I can speak to that having a 14 and 16-year-old. If you intend on getting information, it really requires building that relationship so that there's trust and so that there's two-way communication. You know, my kids don't necessarily offer up what they did, or, you know, I'm sure many of you can relate to asking a child, hey, how was your day? Fine. What'd you do? Nothing. How you doing? Good. Or in the case of my son, it might be just a grunt. But the point being that relationships are the foundation built early that can provide you with this idea of parental knowledge. Here's the last couple of quiz or practices that I want to give you, and then we're going to open it up. There's a quiz that is a really good way to help dads think about this parental knowledge. And here are some of the sample questions from what is the download has 10 questions. And I always say these practices can be modified to be relevant to the situation, to the fathers you're working with. But here are some of the questions. And the idea is to take this quiz, to give it to the fathers and say, you know, how well can you answer these questions? And as their children are get older, they can check their answers with the child. They can check their answers with perhaps the child's mother. But the idea is these 5 examples are what are important things to know about your child. And oftentimes it makes for a great discussion, which is to say, what are the most important things for you to know about your child at any given time? And there's a whole chapter on this that I write, but I think what's most important is knowing where your child is, who your child's with, something about what they're doing with their day, what they're doing at school, what they're doing in child care. And then you can see here there are other questions. What milestones have they reached recently? What are their favorite sounds and words? And the idea here is really about raising consciousness. And this can be a great way for dads to have fun with it and to also be tuned in and reminding themselves. And in fact, I have them write these questions down and keep them with them. And at any point be able to say, I wonder if I do know what my what my child's favorite food is these days. So that's an example of a practice, like I said. And here's one. These quiz cards are for when the children are older, 5, 6 years old. And again, the questions can be modified, but this is an activity that can be done together, where the child answers questions about dad, dad answers questions about the child, then they share their answers. And again, oftentimes can be very, very fun. These questions are for the kids are for a little bit older into school age. And then 2 last things here. The relationship checkup. There's 2 versions of this I have. This is the younger version, and then there's one for ages 9. And these are not hard and fast ages. It really depends on the child, on the relationship. But the idea of the relationship checkup is that the father and the child both take time to answer the questions, and they might, take 1 or 2 of the questions. Again, we're being flexible. Whoops, what happened here? And that is questions that the dad answers and then the child answers, and then they share their responses. And this is what's I would say most important is not just the content. What's important here, equally important, is the process. And that is that we teach relationship by doing it. And this teaches children a language for relationships. In relationships, we talk about what's good, what's going well. We talk about what we like. We talk about what's hard. It's building the foundation for a relationship by doing it and having and using the language of relationships. And as you see in the version for kids that are older, and I've done this with literally thousands of fathers and their children, their answers are often very surprising. Oftentimes fathers and children will find they're on the same page, or there's things they didn't know. But again, it's the process of saying, as a father, I value our relationship enough that I would like to talk about how things are going. I encourage dads to bribe their kids if they need to. With younger kids, it's not as difficult. If a teenager doesn't push back on this, I usually am a little concerned. They will push back, but ultimately, I believe firmly, and I've seen this, that kids really want to connect with their fathers. And this practice it's a tool that gives dads almost like an excuse to have conversations that are difficult to just strike up out of the blue. So that is the relationship checkup. Lastly is building in time as a father, what I call ritual dad-child time. And as you see, there's some research behind this that ideally it's one-on-one time. And in some cases that's not possible, but to the extent it is, I encourage dads to make one-on-one time on a regular basis. Once a month even is I think, a really great ritual to have. And I encourage them to try this for, say, 3 months and see how it goes. And you can see here the tips on how to do it. But the key is following the child's interest. And I've seen all kinds of different ways dads and kids have done this, where they alternate. 1 month the child chooses what to do, next month the dad chooses. And it's really about having time together. It's not pressured or quality time. It's just about being together. And I'll note here to minimize distractions as much as possible in terms of devices and screens. So that's my the last point there in terms of some practices that you can offer dads. And I encourage you to if you have kids or you work with kids, to try some of these out and see how it goes. So that's my talk. I think I'll turn it back to you, Nigel.
Okay, well, thanks very much, John. Yeah, and I'd really like to stress one of the things that John just said at the end there about, the kids really want to connect with their dads. I think sometimes as dads, we don't necessarily realize that they are looking for ways to connect with us. So, I mean, those tools are just so good, John, for helping dads do that and finding a way to do that.
Yeah, can I just say one?
Yeah,
sorry,
one.
one.
Yeah,
I just want to add that because I noticed it here. As you can see, these practices are, I would say, germane, useful for moms as well, because I think we oftentimes assume moms know everything about relationships, and I think that's just a very that's a fallacy, and that it's important for moms to have tools as well. I think these are extremely relevant and can be easily done and adapted.
Yeah, no, a great point. In fact, I think, I've been keeping half an eye on the chat box, and I think that's been part of the chat that people have been having on the side there. Yeah. So I've got just a few questions have come in, so if people want to send more, please do. But one quick question for you, John, then I got a couple for Gardner. Somebody wanted to know when you had the guys complete the survey, did you provide any incentives for that, or was it just that they were keen to do it?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know what? We did not. There were no incentives, and other than they were, we said that this was going to be used to improve the practice, improve the obstetrics, and no, they did it out of the. And I will say there were the vast majority of guys would thank us. They were really excited to do this, and as we said, almost the response rate was pretty incredible.
Yeah, and I think that's it's a good lesson as well for we talked about the fact that kids want to connect with their dads. Dads, are willing to connect with the fatherhood program, or anybody who's trying to reach out and help them. We just got to know the right way to do that, right? So Gardner, let me ask you one sort of general question, and then there's a question that I'm going to pose to both of you. But so that the work that you used to do, Gardner, was more sort of home visiting, right? I see there's been some chats in the box from people doing Healthy Start and Head Start work. Could you just talk a little bit about what you see as the difference between talking to the fathers in a home visit versus talking to them in an office or classroom setting?
Sure. In the home visit, we're on their territory. It's all about them. We also don't have to rely on an appointment time in terms of them coming in. We go to them. If they're not home at that particular moment, they forgot the appointment or something came up, we go back. We keep going and connecting with them. It puts, being in the father's environment puts them in a place that they're more comfortable, as opposed to an office setting, which is sometimes can be a little more sterile or a little more daunting. So the other part of that is by going out and connecting with dads, meeting them where they're comfortable, and that may be their home or it may be a park. Then that makes them more comfortable to come in for things like dad's groups or father-child play groups, because what we do through those home visits is develop a relationship. And it's through that relationship that we do what we do.
Yeah, and that's the work, right? That really is. I mean, people say that to me sometimes. What do you need to do this work? You've got to be able to form that relationship so the guys want to be with you, kind of thing. Yeah?
Well, then I think, and listening to John's got a lot of really great tools, and you've got a lot of terrific tools listed on the website. But our most powerful tool in our practitioner's toolbox is our relationship with dads and moms.
Yep.
And the work that we do.
Yep.
And it's through the relationship that we kind of model for dads how to connect with their kids using all those other tools that we have in our toolbox.
Yep. So the other question for you, Gardner, which is sort of delving a little bit deeper here, but you had mentioned the fact that you help guys understand if their child has a developmental delay. Could you give a specific example of maybe a dad who you've helped with that and how you help them deal with that? Because that's obviously one of the hardest things for a dad to accept. And, you know, they always say that dads want to fix things. Well, you can't fix everything, right? So.
Right. And the delays can be, you know, subtle in terms of slow to speak, or they can be more insidious in terms of things like hearing problems. I can think of a couple of examples where when there were a couple of kids that we worked with that as toddlers were having trouble developing in language skills. And by working with them through the ASQ, or the Ages and Stages, we picked up on some hearing loss, getting them into, and once we got that picked up on, we got them into a medical home who was able to evaluate a little bit further and then do some rehabilitation. And they were able to kind of deal with that problem so that they could kind of rehab those developmental delays. And they were able to get into kindergarten. In preschool, they were having some problems, but by the time they got into kindergarten, they had been able to overcome those delays.
Okay. So I have one, it's a general research question. I don't know if, John, you can take a stab at this, and perhaps Gardner as well, but somebody has pointed out that it seems to be that dad's presence, or even no presence, has a bigger impact than a mum's. Why is that? Do you know anything about any kind of research that would help answer that?
I'm not familiar with that. Mom's, dad's is more. I'm not sure. What
well, you know, I think what it is, we sort of tend to make the case that, you know, if you read the book Father Need by Carl Pruitt, you know, he's emphasizing that in a lot of ways dads are doing things that mums don't do, and so there is a big impact if dad's not around.
Right.
So
I mean, I don't know. I can't point to anything specific. We actually at our website we have a downloadable research review that's kept pretty current, which is really useful. So that's one place I would turn. The other place would be to look at the Fatherhood Institute in the UK, who tends to have an incredible body of research and unbelievable tools. But their research specifically, it doesn't always deal with just the UK. It often will address U.S. fathers and mothers. But I'm not aware of that particular study. I will say that, you know, in education, there's been a number of studies where they found that a father's presence in his child's education can have a greater impact in certain subjects on girls, I believe it was, in math, but I think that there's so many different factors involved in that, for instance, fathers have not historically been as involved. So I don't know that it's I don't know that it's even useful to say that they're present, one or the other. It's not a zero sum that one or the other makes more of a difference.
Yeah. No, I think that's
right.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, John. In fact, I see Nick in the chat box is making the same point. That Carpro, and if I said that he said fathers are more important, I do apologize. Yeah, because as Nick's saying in the chat box, Carpro would not say fathers are more important, but the mums just equally important, and that's obviously that's the message that we want to be getting out there. Yeah. So
I think moms and dads are complementary with each other in terms of what children need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and actually just it's a note I just noticed in the chat box that somebody had mentioned that we need to also teach moms about the importance of fathers. I think that's really important prenatally as well. And interestingly, just in a healthcare setting, I found it fascinating that that we actually worked with interns and I'm forgetting the name, but basically we worked with medical students that here's the next generation of pediatricians and obstetricians, and the one thing that was noted was fathers specifically, they did not break down the gender of the parents. So these doctors to be were never given, other than we did a module for them, had never been asked to think about fathers. It was still, parents. And we're talking about one of the greatest hospitals and healthcare providers in the world. And, the medical school has yet to, to differentiate. And there's lots of different reasons. Some of them are political and some of them are not. But it's not differentiated the father from the mother. And there's a huge opportunity missed if doctors do not know the impact fathers have, if mothers do not know that, and of course if the fathers themselves don't know that. So I think that's really an important point that was brought up.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point again, John. Yeah, and I think I think it may be that when we are trying to convince people that they should be doing more with dads, then maybe we do tend to perhaps overstress the impact of the dad, but we should always remember that we don't want to understress the impact of the mother. Yeah, and you have that issue with some people. If you're talking about, well, we're doing this program for dads, then someone's going to say, well, why aren't you doing it for mothers? And it's because, well, maybe those services are there more readily, right? So you've got to balance that. We don't ever want to be seen as putting dads in front of mothers. So I think this was a great discussion. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't see any more questions, actually, so I think we do have time to show the other video. Could you pull up the other video, Enzo, and then we can have John and Gardner reflect on this a little bit. I think there'll be some good opportunities here to make some more points. Yeah. So this is just a short 2.5 minute. Do you want to say anything to introduce this, John?
Yeah, just one of the concepts that we teach in our curriculum and in the various programs that we run is serve and return. And this is for healthy brain development, the idea that we need to, as parents, pay attention to what children are serving up and then return it. So in the case of, an infant, the child on the changing table might, coo or make sounds. That's a serve. The return would be to repeat those sounds and maybe even add another sound and see if the child mimics it. As kids get older, the idea of serve might be, the idea that a child you have to be tuned into that child to see what it is they're serving, what are they offering up so that you can return it. But also, parents can initiate the serve and see that the child returns it. So reading's a great example, or as they get older, having a conversation. And again, the idea is interaction, back and forth. And what this does is early on, especially 0 to 3, actually even prenatally in utero, is this builds pathways in the brain that are important for language and for relationship development. So that's just
okay.
The
Great.
basic.
Well, let's take a quick look at the video, and then after this, I'll ask each of you to just share maybe a thought on the video, and if there's time, also sort of a key takeaway thought that you'd like to leave people with. But let's roll the video, Enzo.
now learning about the many ways in which solid brain foundations are built and maintained in a developing child. One important way is through what brain experts call serve and return interactions. Imagine a tennis match between a caregiver and a child. But instead of hitting a ball back and forth across the net, various forms of communication pass between the two. From eye contact to touch, from singing to simple games like peekaboo.
The child serves or indicates they're interested in something. The adult who's attentive to that child returns that interest, and that ramps up the child's enthusiasm, and they do the activity again. So when they're learning to read, the child shows an interest in a book. The adult sees that and reads to them. The child gets all excited and tries reading back, and then the child's using those circuits that underlie reading over and over again, driven by the enthusiasm of the interaction with the attentive adult.
The response and attention a child receives from an adult when they are practicing certain social, emotional, and physical skills goes a long way to sparking that child's own excitement with learning and repeating certain actions.
The child gets positive feedback from the adult, and they try harder, so they're using that circuit again and again. That circuit will really be sturdy and will form a sturdy architecture for later life function.
In order to build these sturdy circuits in a developing brain, it's crucial for caregivers to actively engage with the child. Prolonged passive activities, such as leaving the child alone in front of a television or merely holding the child without eye contact, will not build solid brain architecture.
Without serve and return attentive adult interactions, the child's much less likely to undertake a lot of these activities, and their brain won't develop as well.
Serve and return interactions, repeated throughout a young person's developing years, are the bricks that build a healthy foundation for all future development.
Okay, so Gardner, would you like just to reflect on that for a minute and tell us how you think that relates to the whole Cheers assessment that you used?
Well, I think it kind of reflects on Cheers from the standpoint of all of those parts go together in terms of the serve and return that they're talking about, which creates and develops and enhances the brain development of a child. Going through each of those elements of Cheers, helping moms and dads to get more in tune with what they're noticing, how they're responding, how the child is responding, and then in turn, how they're responding back. Makes a lot of sense. And it's good for child development.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed both those videos. We are getting close to time now, so I'm going to give John and Gardner the opportunity to leave us with one final thought. And I don't know if we have John Allen on the line from OFA. Are you there, John? I guess not. So John Bedelman, would you like to leave us with one final word of wisdom here?
Yes, in the words of my mentor and friend, colleague, Terry Real, that's R-E-A-L, he has a great saying, which is relationships aren't something we have, they're something we do. And I think that's really, really important. And there's a lot that we as practitioners can help fathers to do in their relationships, and being active is really critical. And I think of 3 C's. I want to help dads be confident, giving them, helping them with knowledge and understanding that they matter. Competent, and that means competent with skills and with practices that they can put to use. And then lastly, connection. That what's most important is their connection, whether they live with their child or not, that the relationship that they build early and often can last a lifetime, and it's really all about connection.
Wow, that's great. So you said confident, and connection, right?
Yeah, almost progressively. Yeah. Confidence first, then competence, and then connection. But, those three. Yeah.
That's right. And I love what you said as well about relationships are not something we have, they're something we do, because that's what we do as parents, that's what we do as practitioners. Yeah. Okay, Gardner, you get final word, Gardner.
My final word is just to echo John. I think that was just a wonderful what he's saying, and then what he's learned from his mentor in terms of our relationships as practitioners, our relationships with the fathers we work with, and supporting them in their relationships with their children. I think that's what it's all about.
Yep. Wonderful. Okay. Well, we've gotten some very positive feedback in the chat box there. I think the audience has enjoyed you both here. So I thank John and Gardner very much. I thank everybody else for their attention. And you will see a survey link pop up after this. So we do always appreciate any feedback you provide via that. And with that, we'll catch you next time. And those of you who are coming to the summit, I'll look forward to meeting some of you there. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.
And that does conclude today's conference.